Today is March 28th, 2023. We are here, Ms.Jo Glasco and Mr. Tyrone Tyler. We are recording an interview for the Howard African American History Project, part of the Historical Society. Do we have your permission, Ms. Glasco, to share the audio and video versions of this interview with the public?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It is an honor and a pleasure to have you share your story. We have a few questions for you, and we'll make it very informal and interactive, so feel free to stop us at any time. Feel free to add details, to go back and change if you want to add things to a previous topic. But in general, we would like to gather information about your family life in Howard County, your schooling experience, either yours or your children's, whoever was most likely to have been schooled in Howard County, your career in Howard County, which is the primary reason that we're recording this, because as an attorney, and you started your practice in Howard County, to my knowledge. Am I correct?
Yes.
And
That's
so
correct.
that we would like to gather information about that. And of course, community, your perceptions of community at the time you moved in and all the years you've lived here, and then the political climate. So those are the major themes we will be information on. So the first question we have is, what brought you to Howard County, and how long have you lived here?
I came to Howard County in 1973, and I moved here because I was recruited during my third year of law school at Texas Southern University in Houston to come and work for the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and thinking that it was in Washington, D.C., but actually it was Social Security in Woodlawn. And when I was recruited, I was invited to come up and meet with the housing department. And they took me to Columbia. And I had two small children, one 1-year-old and one 5-year-old. And when I looked at Columbia, it reminded me of Texas. And I liked the wide open spaces. At that time, they only had 2 village centers. We had Wild Lake and we had Oakland Mills. And I decided that the school system was going to be good. I felt safe here. And it was a very small community and very welcoming and built on the ideas of inclusion and diversity. And because of that, I relocated, packed my bags, drove up in a car with a hole in the bottom of it. You could see the road, and packed my kids and came up to start a life in Columbia.
I know, Tyrone, you have questions. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, what type of law did you study or practice?
I was an attorney in the Office of General Counsel at the Department of Health, Health and Human Services. And at that time I did disability benefits, I did Medicaid, Medicare, recoupment. I ended up also working in the Business and Administrative Law Division in Washington, D.C., and I did tort law, accident law, represented the doctors and physicians who work for the government. And I also did employment law. And I also worked for the Department of Justice for 2 years. And I was in the civil division. I tried the first case representing the agency for in a Title VII case. It was just starting out in 1975. I was with the government for 10 years, and then I decided to start my own practice in Columbia. And I decided the day I passed the Maryland bar is the day I quit my job with the Department of Health and Human Services. And a lot of my colleagues were saying, oh, you're giving up this good government job, and you're gonna, how are you gonna get clients? And I had decided, and I planned on it for a year before I quit government. And my children, I wanted to be closer to them, and they were getting older. I was a single parent, and I hung out my shingle and I started over at K&M Lakefront North building. And I was the first African-American attorney to open an office in modern day in Columbia, Maryland. And I ended up doing a lot of networking and meeting people in the community and going to a lot of events and passing out my card. And Howard County was very supportive of my practice, and I ended up in K&M Lakefront North, and then I moved over to the clusters at Twin Knolls, and I have been there since 1983, where I was able to purchase my own office, and we had very vibrant practice here in Howard County. And it was a different landscape when I came here. When I came to Howard County, I grew up in a segregated environment in Dallas, Texas, is my home. And so my history was that at that time, the schools were not integrated. And I remember we couldn't try on clothes and Neiman Marcus. We couldn't shop in the stores. I remember the colored and white fountains, water fountains. And my sister and I used to slip and drink out of the white fountains. And I remember having secondary books and no Bunsen burners in the science room. And I also remember that we had Black teachers who were superb educators. They had the highest degree of professionalism. They would come to school dressed in business attire, stockings, heels. They had a no-nonsense posture about them. And many of them had their master's degree and doctorate degrees. And they worked in the school system because those were the only opportunities available to them at that time. When I was also in Texas, I graduated as the valedictorian of my class. And at that time, the University of Texas was awarding scholarships to any African-American who was a valedictorian or salutatorian of their class. So I had a chance to matriculate to the University of Texas in Austin. And I was able to complete my education there. But when I first came to UT, all of the dormitories were segregated. The Black student girls lived in two houses, Almetri's dorm and White's dorm. And the white girls had their own dormitories. So we were segregated even into my freshman year at college. During my sophomore year, the summer before my sophomore year, my mother and father got a call from the Board of Regents at the University of Texas, and they asked whether they would consider allowing me, and there were five of us in all, we would call the Texas Five. They asked us if we would consider integrating the dormitories at the University of Texas. And at that time, Lyndon Johnson was the president, and his daughter, Linda Bird Johnson, lived in Kinsolving Hall, which is the dormitory. We agreed, okay, we'll give it a try and we'll move into the white dormitories. And I think it was a political decision because Lyndon Johnson was the president and he didn't want that type of embarrassment for himself. It was quite an ordeal to integrate the dormitories at the University of Texas. We were isolated and we ate all of our meals together at the table. And I cannot remember many of the white girls reaching out to us. Sometimes they would do things and knock on our door at 3 a.m, put dead birds in front of our door, put flour and stuff in front of our door, and just kind of pranks like that. And there were some other instances of violence during that time when we were trying to integrate the University of Texas, because Texas was #1 in football. But our Darrell Royal, who was in charge of athletic pursuits there, felt like we didn't really need the African-American athlete. And, you know, that sounds strange today, but they were not integrated, and they did take steps later on to bring on the first African-American football player, and the rest is history.
That's phenomenal. This congratulations that you were such a goal-getter, a valedictorian, and part of such rich, sort of like formative trailblazer history. So thank you for sharing that. Do you have any follow-up questions to that, the historical pieces that Ms. Glasco has shared?
Just a comparison. Your description of Dallas is very similar to what we went through. I would say from 1964 up to the time that you actually came here in '73. And Columbia was really built to leave all of that stuff behind. You did not run into it in Columbia like you did, as much as you did in Ellicott City and so much. But so it's amazing that different parts of the country were going through the exact same things with the people.
Let me bring a little history to you when I came to Columbia.
Mhm.
When I came to Columbia as an attorney, and I worked for the government, I didn't really know a lot about the local scene, the Howard County Bar, and what was going on here in Howard County. But when I opened up my practice, I became aware of the racial animus in Howard County to the extent of, and in Maryland, because the law field was not used to having women attorneys and not used to seeing Black attorneys in the courtroom. When I came here, the clerk's office in Ellicott City was all white. The judges on the district court and the circuit court were all white males. We had a courthouse in Ellicott City, which was a house at that time. And this was even before the courthouse that a lot of people are familiar with. And we had an old house, and I just remember it to this day. But I must say that the Howard County Bar was also not integrated. James E. Henson Sr. and myself were the first attorneys to join the Howard County Bar. And we were able to meet people and be included. And as a result, I feel that it's very fulfilling for me to now see the clerk's office integrated, the circuit court judges diverse, the district court diverse. But there's still a stigma in some areas of practice where there is a perception that you're not a lawyer. I've had judges in different jurisdictions say, I want the lawyers to meet me in chambers, and I go in chambers and they say, oh no, we didn't want the parties. We didn't want the person, we wanted the lawyers. So, and I remember going to Frederick County, and I was putting on my case, and the judge said, wait a minute, Ms. Glasco, and left the bench. And he came back and he said, I checked you out, and I called Annapolis to see who you were. And they did tell me you were an attorney and you were licensed. So you can proceed. So you can imagine.
What year was that?
That was probably in '87.
Wow.
But even in a few years after that, it was a perception that you were not as good, or there was a good old boy system in place, and it still exists to a much smaller extent today. And I can see an improvement in the bar and in their commitment to diversity and inclusion. And the climate of Howard County at that time was more of an attitude toward diversity, but it seems as we've gotten older and more mature, I've been here for 50 years, I can see incidents of discrimination, racism, rearing its ugly head again. And I still think it's a good place to live, and I'm glad that I landed here.
I'm going to call you Attorney Glasco. Is that okay with you, or do you prefer?
You can call me that. That's fine. And I
So,
want to also give a shout out to my friend James E. Henson, he died in December of year before last, 2021. He was the first African American attorney to join the Office of Law in Howard County. And Jim and I were the founders of the Warren Mitchell Law Society in Howard County, and we are still going strong to this day. We're an affiliate chapter of the Maryland State Bar, and we're a specialty bar with the Maryland State Bar, and we're an affiliate chapter with the National Bar Association.
thank you so much. So you are officially the first African-American woman to join the Howard County Bar? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, when I
Congratulations.
joined, there weren't any Blacks in practice. After I started, there were, of course, we have a good representation now, a better representation. But yeah, I was the first, and I applied for a judgeship. I'll never forget it. And I went to an interview with the Howard County Bar, and I sat down, and they said, "Does anyone have any questions?" Not a single question. I sat there for 2 minutes or more, just looking embarrassed. And then when they had the vote, it was an insult. I was voted the highest not recommended, in of all the candidates. And it was heartbreaking for me that I thought I had made inroads by meeting with the bar. I'm on this committee, that committee. But at the same time, I did bring some controversial cases, which were about discrimination and use of excessive force in Howard County. And I'm sure that did not engender me to some people in the legal profession.
What year
I
was
don't
that
know,
that you applied for
it was
judgeship?
probably, I can't remember, but it was maybe 8 years after I was in practice. It had to be after 1990 because I bought the Bowie case, and it was considered as the highest profile case in Howard County in 1990. And this was a case where 2 young white men, students at Oakland Mills High School, were abused by the Howard County Police. These were kids who were seniors at Oakland Mills. They were celebrating their senior year. And they had an integrated party at the Red Roof Inn on Route 1. And as a result, they were probably loud or whatever, and they got a noise complaint. And the police came and ended up handcuffing them and beating them really badly while they were in handcuffs. And I was called by Reverend John Wright. Reverend Wright was at that time the president of the NAACP. And I must say, he was such an outstanding civil rights pioneer in Howard County. He doesn't get the credit that he deserves. He's passed on. But Reverend Wright asked me if I would take on this case. And I did, and it was very high profile because the young men had photographs of themselves with bruises all over their face, black and blue. And there were about 12 or 15 kids in that room, and everybody saw it. And so this case went on for 2.5 years. And the worst part of the case was that after we filed a complaint, these boys were twin boys, the Bowie twins. And John Bowie was found hung on the backstop in Oakland Mills, where he died in January, after these guys had been beaten up by the police about 4 months earlier. So there was a lot of controversy about whether or not the officer who was involved had anything to do with his murder. And there was investigations by the state, by the Howard County Police and the Civil Rights Division. And it was never confirmed that this officer was involved, but As a result of that case, Howard County Police Department changed how they investigate internal affairs, and I think they have become more sensitive to police brutality issues. And I haven't heard of a lot of those issues since that case. So that was something that we'll always remember. There's been a book written about it called Losing John by David Parrish, and David has passed on. He died about a few months ago.
Oh my goodness. So would you win that case?
It was settled. It was a confidential settlement. Dr. Ecker was our county executive. And of course, with it being confidential, I can't disclose the terms of the settlement.
Okay. That is so sad for the family to lose a child. What happened to the other twin, if I may ask? Do you know?
Yes, Mickey is doing well. I still hear from his mother occasionally. They relocated out of Howard County, and I think Mickey might be nearby and has a job, and went on to become very, very successful with his life.
That's good
But
to know.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Could you share some other law case that you represented of discrimination in the areas of housing or, like you said, police brutality?
I've had other cases where I represented plaintiffs and complainants before the Office of Human Rights. And one of the cases was called Odeyoye v. Wawa. And Mr. Odeyoye was fired from Wawa, and we sued for discrimination. And we were able to prevail in that case before the Human Rights Commission. Another case I had was Ruth Edwards, who was the executive director of Citizens Against Spousal Assault, CASA. And I represented Ms. Edwards before the Human Rights Commission because they fired her and she accused them of discrimination, and we didn't prevail in that case, but it was a high profile case. Another case I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say another high profile case that I had was the case of Lula Moore. I've forgotten the name of the defendant, and I don't want to put their name out because they were politically involved, and I'm sure it was, I know it was an embarrassment for them, but this was a case of an old Black lady who lived on land where she was actually the caretaker for generations, like the nanny for generations of white families. And they promised her that she could stay on some land until she died. And she took this to heart, and it was repeated more than once by other family members. But sure enough, they did evict her. And so she came to me, and I filed the case, trying to stall off her being evicted. We ended up where they didn't put it in writing, so it wasn't a strong case, but I think it ended up with her having some time to get moved to another location.
Thank you so much. When you were around, had you heard of Hilltop in Howard County, Hilltop?
I have heard of Hilltop.
Did you get any clients from there? Because there were instances, and even Mr. Tyrone can tell us, of housing discrimination.
I didn't do any of those cases, no.
Okay. So
I
now
did a lot of personal injury cases. My biggest case was one of my clients' husband was in a helicopter crash. He worked for the Bureau of Land Management and the Department of Interior. And he was overlooking the Grand Canyon, and the helicopter did a wire strike and knocked the helicopter down, and he died. So we were able to, I worked with an attorney who I met in Department of Justice and the tort section. And we were able to bring a case against the helicopter company for negligence. And we were very successful in prevailing with that case.
Congratulations. Would you say that that your cases, you serve mostly minorities or a mix?
I had a mix. I've had mostly minority Black clients supported my practice, but I've had some white clients, and I mean, I've represented some. It was so interesting to me. I represented this white guy with a divorce, and I must say I did very well in my family law practice with the custody and divorce and that type of thing.
Thank you for sharing.
So
So you
this is
Go.
what I thought was so ironic, and I have handled over 400 cases in Howard County, and I go to Montgomery County and Baltimore County. But I had a pipe to burst in my office, frozen. And this adjuster came and he said, we're having a problem verifying, because I had insurance and so on, and they were debating and going on. And so he said, well, I think you need to not worry, because this is going to be resolved because you have this coverage and that coverage. And he says, and I'm going to make sure that you are put back in the position you were in. And he said, do you remember me? And I said, no. He said, you did my divorce.
So that speaks for your success. That's so impressive. So what are you most proud of as an attorney in Howard? What are you most proud of?
I am most proud that the community embraced me and allowed me to become successful. I'm most proud that I've raised my two sons here, and they have become successful in their own rights. And I'm just grateful for the warmth that I've been shown by the residents of Howard County, and the history of relationships. And I look back and I say, well, maybe I need to relocate. You know, as you get older, you want to think about other locations. But every time I leave and I come back, I'm glad that I'm living here.
That speaks a lot. So could you share, for example, your family life in Howard and responsibilities for your children and you, and where you lived? What you said at that time there was only Wild Lake and Oakland Mills. So where you lived, did your children and you eat together? Those kinds of things.
We had a better life after I left government, and I could be home at a decent hour. It was very stressful for me to go into DC every morning. We would leave at 6:30 and get home around 6. And my kids at that time were like 3 and 8, and we had child care. We had this one lady who kept a lot of children in Oakland Mills that I met, and I left my kids there. And so that's why when I passed the bar, I quit to be close to home so I could get to the schools fast and be there more for them. It was a good environment for them. I remember some bad interactions when my kids were on Little League, and my son was called a racial slur name, and he got into a fight with a young man, a little boy. And sure enough, he would not go back and play Little League anymore after that. So even though Columbia is diverse, we still have some vestiges of racism here.
We touch on, Anita?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, go ahead, Tyrone.
We touch on your early life, say your parental guidance. What drove you towards the law? Did your parents have anything to do with that?
Let me just say that my family history is that my mother was the first teacher to integrate the schools in Dallas.
Okay.
So we had a pattern and an example in our family of being the first. And so I've forgotten your question. I was thinking about my mother.
What drove you to law?
Oh, okay. I was married to a guy who was in law school, and I used to read his books. And at that time, I was determined not to be a teacher, but I had my degree and I majored in home economics. I was going to be a fashion designer. So I worked at Neiman Marcus and I worked at Sanger Harris. These are department stores, trying to become a buyer. And I ended up where I wasn't selected, in their, I was in the program, but I was never selected or appointed to a specific division. They rotated me around. So I decided that maybe, and I had a chance to go to Pratt Institute in New York in fashion design. And I met this young man in University of Texas, and we got married and started a family. And so I started substitute teaching, and I was in position at Worthing High School in Houston. And the teacher's position that I was in was fired because he pulled a gun on a student. This was a rough neighborhood, Sunnyside, where, I think about George Floyd. He grew up in that neighborhood, not to say he had, was a thug or anything like that, but it was supposedly a rough neighborhood. So I used to read his law books, and the guy who was the assistant dean, a guy named Craig Washington, who was a congressman here, came to me and he said, "Joe, we have some money. I think you should go to law school." And my husband at that time was in law school, and he said, "I don't want my wife to be a lawyer." And so I was really, I wasn't militant. I was more low key and subservient. And so I said, I turned him down. I'm not going to be a lawyer. I'm not going to, thank you. And then I had to go to the University of Houston I never took education courses because I did not want to be a teacher. But for me to keep my position as a permanent substitute, I had to start working on education courses. So I attended a Bill of Rights Institute program at the University of Houston Law School, and the professors came to me and they said, "We think you should go to law school." And at that time, my marriage was crumbling and I had these 2 kids to raise. So I just went on and accepted the scholarship to go to Texas Southern University Law School. And that's how I got in. And I went on, I passed the Texas bar the first time I took it. And then I got recruited up here. So
congratulations. That's phenomenal. Do you remember the names of the professors?
I don't remember those guys, but they were just really encouraging.
Phenomenal. Could you share your mother's name?
Lily Ruth Franklin.
And your father's name?
Ennis Franklin. My father was the head, deputy of the housing department for the city of Dallas.
That's phenomenal.
So, yeah, he was in charge of what they call the projects. And they were all over South Dallas, West Dallas. So everybody knew my dad. And
that's phenomenal. Could you share your children's names, if at all possible?
Michael and Joseph Glasco.
Wonderful. And could you tell us about their schooling experience in Howard County? I know you mentioned a babysitter. So I know babysitting is not easy even today. It's costly. And as a mother, you always worry about if your children are taken care of. You said you met this woman. What was her name? And
I can't remember her name.
That's fine. And she watched the children at home or in a licensed facility? In her home.
She had a house in right off of Santiago Road. They're now Section 8. She lived in one of those apartments, and she kept several children of my co-workers from Social Security. So we would take our kids there in the morning, pick them up in the evening.
That's nice.
Ms. Johnson was her name.
Miss Johnson. How wonderful. You think she still lives here in Howard County?
I doubt it, because
you doubt it.
She probably passed on. She was up in age at that time.
I understand. So
Mhm.
tell us about the community, Howard County. What was it like in terms of spaces and places, first for children and teenagers and then for adults? Was it, you know, tell us about these spaces. Were they religious spaces like church, or were they kinds of spaces did your family participate in?
My family attended the First Baptist Church of Guilford, is where I joined. When I first came here, it was not that big church that they have now. It was a small church. Reverend Wright was the minister, and it was a very active part of my life. They were on the junior usher board. And so we were active in the church, and it was a good environment at that time. Everybody knew each other. There was a good social scene here. People were friendly, and we would have a group of us would meet at each other's homes and have parties, and it was just a really fun support time. And it just breaks my heart that a lot of my friends from that age, that era, have passed on or are not doing well.
Not doing what? Sorry, your voice cut out.
They're not doing well. Some
Oh.
of them are infirm and sick.
Oh,
But at that time, we had
sorry.
a great community. We were active with Citizens United for Black Equality, and that was a group that was headed up by Pearl Atkinson Stewart. And I recommended her for her history. She has a lot to contribute historically to Howard County. We would do things with, I give a shout out to Miss Rutina Blake, Reverend Blake. She has a group called Angels Alert, but she historically was one of the first pioneers in Howard County. And I remember she would have social events like botillions, bobtillions for the young men who would be introduced into society with their tails and hats on, and they would have classes on etiquette, and we had our sororities. We still do. I'm an Alpha Kappa Alpha, and I became an AKA at the University of Texas in 1964, and there's a very active group of AKAs out here now. I think there are 2 chapters, and the fraternities are here and doing a lot of contributing to enhancing the lives of our young people. They're doing a lot of mentoring. They're doing a lot of giving back to the community with volunteer work. And it's a strong community as far as the Black social groups are concerned. Very active.
Any thoughts on the growth of Howard County? How it's doing? Where would you like to see it go? Is it growing too fast?
I think it's growing too fast. And I've expressed myself to, I'm not a quiet person as far as issues. And I think it bothered me, the lack of diversity that I have seen with regard to the business community. I look at the Howard Hughes project, and I don't see a lot of African American contractors, entrepreneurs getting a piece of the action the way that I think that they could or should. I think there's a disproportionate number of Black businesses who are participating in the business community here. And since I think we make up almost 20% of the population, but we might not get but 2 or 3% of business opportunities. I was one of the early members of the Equal Business Opportunity Commission, along with Claiborne Chavers. He was another trailblazer in that area. And we used to get reports from the procurement office about the number of providers that were being given business from the county. And Cecil Bray was over that section for Howard County. And we were very more vibrant and interested in making sure that the African American business community was included. We would have business fairs. If some of the businesses were denied contracts, they would frequently contact the EBO Commission, and we would become involved in helping them file appeals and getting business. So, and then I look at the Howard County Courthouse that was built. I just felt like African-American businesses should have been more involved. African-American lawyers should have been more involved. I mean, we are here and we deserve to, I think, a bigger piece of the pie for that. I think it's $140 million. But you can ask for inclusion, but it has to be the people at the table who think about you. A lot of times I don't think it's a conscious effort. It's just that they don't think about including African-American businesses or lawyers.
Now that we have an African-American county executive, do you think that you can bring these issues to the table and hope that things will change in favor of like equality?
Yes, I had conversations with Calvin Ball, and I can see a difference. I think he's making an effort to make things better. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought it to his attention, because I know that, you know, even though you're retired, you can still continue to advocate.
Yes,
and I'm glad.
I introduced myself to him, and after that, and I've met with some of his staff, and I can see some improvement. I can see some outreach to try and improve, and so that to me is a good thing.
That's wonderful.
I wish they would slow down this building though. The building, I mean, every time you look up, I couldn't believe downtown, all of a sudden it's full of these tall high rises. So
Yeah,
with me coming here, huh?
Yeah, I guess they're running out of space. That's when they start building up.
Okay.
Yes. The only place I think that we have a little bit of land left is where across from the Harriet Tubman Cultural Center, that area, Martin Road, Harriet Tubman Lane. But you even see next to the synagogue, all of that land it was taken up, and 3 years ago, I think they built these 28 townhouses development there as well. But it is, and then Old Ellicott City, Mr. Tyler has done a documentary that shows the overdevelopment. So it's like money. It's all about money, it seems. But
Yes,
we do want to ask you a final question about the political climate. What was it like when you moved here, and has it changed?
Well, I remember when I moved here, people like Liz Bobo and Jenny Thomas and Pearl Stewart, and it was very liberal. And it's, to me, it's still liberal and progressive, but I can't say that it's conservative in any way. I mean, it's a liberal progressive place, and I still think there's room for more diversity and more inclusion. And it should be present in all areas of Howard County. And it shouldn't be that I went to a meeting last night where there's a big controversy where the AKA sorority has had to demonstrate against the county auditor and write letters to pass a bill to allow these groups, who are not-for-profit groups, to meet at the library without being profiled. You know, say this African-American group here, the auditor did a study on it, and as a result, they were question, and that shouldn't happen in this day and age. Those kind of things have no place here. There shouldn't be a big project where when you look at a picture of who who they're letting contracts to, it's mostly Asians, Indians,
Koreans, and you mean Asians, Chinese. And
yeah, but not African American. Not many. You can count on two fingers, a few fingers.
it's very obvious in Ellicott City, very obvious in Ellicott City. But and I think we have the largest Korean settlement in the country, and a growing Chinese population, and Indian, and many of there are a few Indian business. I think there's one in Ellicott City or two, and then a lot of like tech folks. So, but the tech businesses. But you're right, there's a lot of that. So how would you address that? How would you address that?
Well, for instance, there is a practice of when something is leaded for procurement purposes, and they have a goal, because we don't have quotas, but you have a goal of 15% minority.
You froze, sorry. You froze for a bit, and I think you're still frozen, so we'll have to revisit this question again. Attorney Glasgow, you froze for a bit. Can you hear us? So you were addressing the business disparity, obvious, especially in Ellicott City, and you mentioned procurement, and I believe you mentioned that the law says 15% of procurement contracts should go to minority-owned business. Is that correct?
The county, I believe, used to have it in the code that a 15% goal was set aside for minority businesses. So they satisfy that requirement by women-owned businesses, veteran businesses, Asian, Latino, and African American. So as a result, they mix all of that in. And when the picture was taken of the contractors who got business for building the courthouse, I looked at it, and there were only three. They had on black ties, and they were celebrating getting contracts. And there were only 3 blacks on the picture, and one was the county administrator, and the other one was the chief judge of the court. And the rest were Indian, Asian, and Latino, and women. So that's how a lot of times African American businesses aren't sought out, because they are meeting their goals by hiring these other groups. So I was at a meeting and the guy from Howard Hughes was there, and I asked him, why do you have such a low rate of giving contracts to Black businesses? And he was saying that we have met our goal because Howard County hasn't done a diversity study for businesses. And so we don't have anything to go by. And I'm an employment lawyer, and you don't have to have a study for you to decide on a certain percentage that you're trying to meet or to give out to the Black businesses. But when they loop everybody in and all of those different groups into
minorities,
then you can, they don't feel a need to be proactive in attracting African American businesses.
We get lost in the mix.
So the bottom line is money, because if you're all technical, then the richer, the ones who bring more money to the table or have larger investments are more likely to win, it appears. But again, this is not my area.
It used to be, when I was on the EBO commission, that the primary contractors were highly encouraged to give 10% of their contracts to minority businesses. And they made it a practice to include minority businesses. I know we had a law firm that did our bond work, And they were predominantly white, big law firm, but they bought on a minority firm with them to get 10% of the proceeds from the contract. And this was a common thing when I was on the EVO commission, that the main contractors were highly encouraged to do that. And I don't know if that, I don't think that's being done today. I don't see any evidence of it.
Could one argue that that justifying contracts on the basis of ethnic, cultural grounds defeats the purpose of integration? I'm just playing devil's advocate. As an attorney, how would you respond to that?
Okay. The percentages are goals. They're not quotas. And the purpose of trying to be fair in awarding contracts is you look at your population. You look at what percentage of your population is Black. And then you look at what percentage. So you want to be fair and have an even playing field, then your goal is to hire a proportion of the workforce consistent with your project. If 20% of the population is African American, then you want, of your minority contractors, you try to give them 20%. You don't try to give them 2%.
That makes sense. And you try to be inclusive as regards income, or sort of like small, small, medium versus large, because typically the small businesses are the most vulnerable. Wouldn't you agree?
They are the hardest to maintain and the hardest to succeed. There are programs that we worked on early on. I was a member of a group of Black businesses, and we met every Monday morning at 8 o'clock back in the 80s. And we were interested in making sure that Black businesses were getting a piece of the pie. So one morning we decided to invite Dr. Ecker to our meeting, the county executive. And when he came, we were saying to him, we need somebody to help us do our marketing plans, someone to help us make packages for loans and train us and that type of thing. And so he said that he was willing to support that. And then I asked him, was he willing to put something in his budget so that it would be a paid employee who was doing this with us? And he said that he would. And as a result of that meeting, we ended up getting in the budget money set aside for the Business Resource Center, money set aside for and a group called the Economic Development Authority. And it's still in existence today. And those Black businesses, I think, should get credit for their being a trailblazer in that area.
That's so important. And thank you for sharing that. And thank you for your continued advocacy, because I know the EDA is very active in Baltimore for the East Development Project, like, during the biotech company set up there. So we thank you for your time. Unfortunately, I have to run, but if Tyrone has, our burning, we would like for him to get to quickly ask. Go ahead.
No further questions, really. Just thank you for including me. It was nice talking to you, Ms. Glasco.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure, Attorney Glasco, hearing all that you've done and your continued advocacy. And we may have a follow-up, but for now, we are very grateful that we have captured your story. And thank you for sharing it.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.